All right, everybody, welcome to the Gildre Spotlight podcast. Today we have a very special guest. He is also fellow Gildre member Chris Ricklin. He is the co-founder of Topline. He kind of has a very unique background. He went to Stanford University. You also went to London School of Economics too, if I'm not correct.
Yep, that's right.
So very well educated, but yeah, actually, Chris, if you can give our listeners a background of yourself, where you're from, what you're doing, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. Well, Taiga, thank you for having me. Excited to be here and to be part of the network and the group and have these opportunities, and excited to dive in. But yeah, thanks for the intro. And yeah, I'm Chris Ricklin. I'm the co-founder of Topline. Yeah, I've been all over the world. I grew up in London, England, and then with kind of a Swiss side of the family and American side of the family, and always knew I was going to end up in college in the States, and luckily ended up at Stanford, which was an amazing experience, which we can get into. And I guess that was, early trigger of entrepreneurship in my journey, but my career has taken me all sorts of places in terms of jobs and locations. And I'm now, kind of where I always wanted to be, which is doing entrepreneurship. And location wise, I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. So I recently moved again and to join my co-founder here in Charleston. And it's a great place to be, and excited to dive in about kind of how that's all taken place. And yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, Chris. Yeah, thank you for that. And I want to go back to where you're from. You have a unique accent. It's like a American and British accent mix. But you said you have an American and Swiss background. How did you end up in London growing up?
Yeah, my family just ended up there. Basically, I could have been born anywhere, I guess. My parents met in Silicon Valley and out there, and then various kind of business adventures took them to New Zealand and Portugal and London, and London was just happened to be where I was born, and some kind of business things stuck for the family there. And yeah, I feel very kind of fortunate to have been born and raised in the UK. But yeah, my accent, I guess, is kind of a little bit mixed. People say I'm Irish or Australian, or, it really depends on what I'm doing. If I'm watching football, like soccer football, I definitely sound more British, or if I'm speaking to my UK friends. And then if I'm listening to country music or running around in the US, I tend to sound a little bit more American. So it just depends on the situation.
It sounds like a great balance. What was it like growing up in London to two, I guess they're both technically immigrant parents in the UK. What
Yeah.
was that like?
Yeah. I mean, it was a great place to grow up. I think I enjoyed being able to kind of live in an international city, and I think London is very well connected, and it kind of leans into being able to get different places and travel a lot. So I was very lucky that my family liked to travel and kind of expose you to many different cultures in the world, including, a lot of time in the US. I have family in the US. My mom grew up in St. Louis, so I'd spend some summers in the sweltering Midwest, and then kind of all over. Ended up going to summer camp in northern Minnesota. So I'd fly from London to the US almost every summer from when I was 9 years old to when I was 18 or even 20 plus, because I was a counselor for a few years. Enjoyed the north woods of the US. And, that was just a big part of my background of being international. But, the UK itself was amazing. I grew up playing rugby and went to a, very kind of all boys school with the school uniform and in a very British way. And, that's still home. Although, I've been all over the US and have spent, a couple different times back and forth to London during my career. So happy to, again, get into that.
Going back to, you're a trip leader and counselor at that camp in Minnesota. Why Minnesota out of all
Yeah.
places?
Yeah, out of all places, I guess my mom actually went to summer camp, there growing up, and I think really liked the values that it instilled in their family. And instead of running around, Europe, of which I've done later in my life, going on vacation to Europe and enjoying that, I think they thought that it would be a better upbringing to spend time in the woods and, without your phone. And that's always been a hugely important part of my life because of that. And I'm really thankful that I got that experience to really lean into the outdoor side of the US and kind of see how valuable that was. And obviously kind of the opposite of being in tech, but I think it kind of gives you that appreciation for, what do you do when you need to decompress, which I still always find myself in the outdoors to do that.
Yeah, I don't know if you knew this, Chris, but I originally am from Montana, but I was born in Japan. So I was, having kind of a big city life in Tokyo, experiencing my sister lives in Tokyo, my mom lives in Sendai. And then I come back to Montana and be in the middle of nature. And I come to a conclusion where I really enjoy nature. I really enjoy being outside. How was that contrast for you, being someone from London, a very big city, coming to Minnesota every single summer and experiencing nature? How did you kind of adapt to that? And how did that change your perspective going to
Yeah. I think I didn't really appreciate it when I was a kid. I think it was just something that we did and I really enjoyed it and I didn't think it was that crazy. 12-hour flights have never been crazy for me. Sounds like similar to you. You just kind of get used to it and then people remind you later that that's not that normal. But I think looking back on it, there's been a number of mentors and community that I built and really like that's where I experienced like American culture for the first time, and that was quite different. The people, both the counselors that I met and the kids were, quite different to the UK, and kind of being able to adapt in those different cultures quickly. I think that's always been, I think it's, one of my number one kind of traits in those like tests that you do is adaptability. And that's, I think if looking back on it, it's kind of where that started is adaptability to different cultures. And then, that's translated into many things.
I'd kind of consider you, Chris, like a global citizen. You've been all over the world. You've lived in multiple countries. How do you adapt to so many different cultures, and what's kind of like the first practice you would do when you go to a new place to make sure that you can adapt to that culture efficiently?
Yeah. I mean, I think that goes for also living in many different places in the US. I think every state and every city is different, and I've been lucky to live in a lot of them. But for me, it's always just about getting out in the community and meeting people and being very present. You don't get the benefits of that difference, and meeting different people, but also like forcing yourself to adapt and learn quickly. It's just getting out and joining communities, going to events. I'm definitely in the heat of that right now in Charleston. It's just, forcing myself to go out and meet as many people as possible and learn what the people and the community, what's different about this place versus others. So yeah.
Got it. And going back to your adolescence, you just finished school in London, you're about to go to Stanford. How did that all kind of come together? Obviously, Stanford is one of the best universities in the world. Was this something that you were achieving or trying to accomplish your whole entire life? Or did you kind of, apply, see if I'm going to get in, and then you ended up going? Like, how did that all come to fruition?
Yeah. I mean, I remember pretty specifically when I was 13 years old, there was, I guess I had been exposed to this summer camp a little bit, but I had, obviously mainly followed rugby and cricket and football in the UK, but had a little interest in the American sports. And I remember going to visit Stanford when I was, 13 or 14 years old. And there was a World Series between the Giants and the Angels, I believe it was. And it was going back and forth between LA and San Francisco. And it was just a super exciting time. And we were running around the Stanford campus. And I just remember being, this place is awesome, complete, palm trees everywhere, beautiful weather, London's pretty gray. So just, it did seem like a completely different world at that time. And I think I just decided, pretty early on that I'd like to go there for college. It sounds like a good experience. And as you go on your teens, all right, okay, I'd like to go to American university generally because it offered this more unique learning experience compared to the UK. So in the UK, when you're 16, you have to choose basically what you're going to study. And I didn't really have a specific thing I wanted to study. I wanted to keep learning broadly. Also American, from the movies and everything you learn, it seems pretty fun to go to college in the US. But really, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so instead of having to settle on when you're 16 years old, you have to choose politics, history, economics. If you want to study economics, you have to focus. And instead, I chose biology, German, politics, and something else. So I could just do whatever I wanted at that time. And that led me into, with Stanford, you could spend 2 years really exploring all sorts of different, learnings before you have to really focus down on a major and what you want to do. So it just always matched my personality, kind of the US system. And then once I got in early to Stanford, I didn't apply anywhere else. And that was.
Wow. I mean, because I visited Stanford a long time, probably back in like 2000, when I was in middle school, I was like looking at schools and I was like, this is the most amazing university, but it was like a 4% acceptance rate. So I was like, all right, like that's a long shot for me. But it's fantastic that, you ended up going. I see that you ended up majoring in poli sci. Why did you go that route?
Yeah. I guess it was one of the things that I, had chosen and to focus on in the UK. And I kind of loved that study of kind of British politics and kind of the impact that I had in, the UK, obviously, and around the world in terms of systems. Originally, I thought maybe one of my career choices could have been legal, could have been being a lawyer. And so that kind of matched up with some of that route. So just found it enjoyable to write papers. Like that was definitely always my skill set, was writing versus anything more kind of analytical problem set based was definitely not matched as much to my brain. So I think, one of the mantras I've had in life is, you're good at what you enjoy. And I enjoyed writing and researching those types of papers. And so, the Stanford experience for me compared to some of my computer science and economics friends was very enjoyable. And I loved the classes and I loved writing the papers, and I had lots of time and space to play rugby and do fraternity things and enjoy the campus and life there. I think it was a great choice and definitely impacted my future career more than I thought it was. I did not think I was going to end up using my kind of political interest so much in my career, which, I did. And yeah, so it worked out well.
All right. So we're at Stanford in your career. I see that you entered Stanford around 2007, and I guess that was around obviously Google was already existing, Apple was already existing. Silicon Valley was it kind of blowing up at that time, or what was Palo Alto, Silicon Valley like back in 2007, and how did it change throughout the 4 years that you were?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's an interesting time, looking back at that time. I think people who were graduating when I was just arriving were kind of right into the boom of Silicon Valley. So they were all getting, like early to mid early jobs at Facebook and Google and some of the big tech companies. And then there was this emerging kind of cadre of tech companies that probably started, becoming very present. Like I think it was, Uber and some companies like that were starting right around that time. So that was probably a few years, like right as I began. And then you had obviously 2008 happen kind of. And so the people who graduated a couple years ahead of me were struggling to get jobs anywhere, actually. So even in tech, and, obviously there's still a growing time, but it was probably a time of a lot of hiring freezes and, at all stages of the economy before things kind of settled down. And I think by the time I was graduating, um, there was a lot more kind of hiring and scaling of, those kind of second stage tech companies. So it was definitely something I considered at the time, and I didn't really know kind of exactly what job function I would take, in that companies. But I was, Stanford just infuses you kind of with that, entrepreneurship and tech company culture. And so it was definitely looking at that, was looking at kind of PR and public affairs roles at tech companies at that time. It was probably pretty early days for that. Obviously, those are huge functions in a lot of those companies now, but nothing quite seemed right for what was truly going to inspire me. And that's always been a thing for me, is kind of waiting for that thing that really inspires me to take action. And so it wasn't quite at that time that I got into the tech world.
And I think, you brought up an interesting point because you entered Stanford at 2007, 2008 happened, the housing bubble popped. But then also around that same year, smartphones really started to take over. When you first entered Stanford, did you have a smartphone back in 2007?
I think so. Yeah.
Did you see like a shift with smartphones and people starting to utilize their phones in social scenarios and social settings? And people, at least folks that you probably went to university with, were they trying to, build the next breakthrough app? Was that kind of like the start of, I feel like everyone started to create apps around that time, or
Yeah.
wanting to create the best big app,
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of that, and I think a lot of that talk was kind of siloed, I would say, between the kind of engineering side, the computer science side at Stanford, and kind of the rest of us. It was a lot of talk about, if you did have that technical background, you were almost encouraged to drop out and start your own thing, and there was a lot of buzz about certain things. I remember there was one called Klinkle that was a big buzz, right? I think must have been right around when I graduated. Obviously, Snapchat started kind of pretty quickly out of Stanford, right around the time that I graduated, and had a lot of friends kind of from both the technical and non-technical side join Snapchat. So it was definitely, maybe I don't think about it because it was just so ever present there, and a lot of people went straight into it and then had, long careers in San Francisco, jumping around multiple tech companies, and are now, high level executives at startups, or, VC funds and all the things. So yeah.
And so when you finished Stanford, obviously the degree it was a Bachelor of Science, right? In political science? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what was your first career job
Yeah.
after
Yeah. So
university?
my first job out of university was on the Romney campaign right out of college. So I was talking to someone about really less about politics per se and more about kind of campaigns in general. And, it was pretty, I grew up kind of middle of the road. UK politics is, very kind of centrist on both sides in many ways. And, looking back then, it was in some ways similar in the US, even though it didn't seem like it at the time. And, I had some kind of vague personal connections to kind of Romney world at that time, and thought it would be, kind of got sold by a couple friends who'd done some political things, that it would be a cool way to, experience the US, travel around the country, or just kind of get your feet wet in politics. And so I actually took a 4 week break right after, not break, right after school, and did a 4 week canoe trip, like led a canoe trip up to, basically we got dropped off in the middle of nowhere and canoed for 4 weeks into Hudson Bay, way up in literally polar bear country. And so I remember calling, the campaign office and saying, hey, I'm gonna be there. I'll be in Boston in a few months, but I'm not gonna be reachable for a while. And so yeah, kind of just rocked up in Boston, which was the headquarters, and started trying to figure out how to get paid. I think I was delivering packages for the senior staff for the first few weeks, and trying to meet, senior leaders and figure out kind of my place on the campaign, and basically met the head of the advanced team, which is kind of how events get organized, and rallies and fundraisers get kind of produced all around the country. And at the very beginning, it was driving Mitt around New Hampshire and Iowa and early states, way before he even became the candidate at that time. So I didn't really know what I was in for, except that it was a interesting job, and ended up spending the next year and a half. I think I went back to Boston one time in 9 or 10 months, and was on the road with the campaign with Mitt and Anne, and I got to really see the entire country, and got to see not just how the West Coast worked and the East Coast worked, but how the whole country operated at all levels, and met some amazing people and saw some amazing places. And so from this kid from, the UK, was kind of traveling all around the States, and I've been to 48 states. I've been to all the mainland states, and I've yet to be to Hawaii or Alaska somehow. So I'm going to do it.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, a couple things from that. So you had a 4 week long canoe trip right out of university. Was that with the same camp that you were with in Minnesota, and you guys all went? Okay.
Yeah, that was me being a counselor at that
Hmm.
point, responsible for, 10, 16-year-old kids, and I was,
Hmm.
22 or whatever.
Right.
So I was the responsible adult, I guess. And, yeah, that's probably one of the most memorable experiences of my life, was kind of taking that canoe trip out, and everything went very right, and we had great weather, and it was incredible. So yeah.
Yeah. You got to come to Montana, and we got to do a rafting trip sometime.
Yeah.
And I know we
Sounds
got
good.
some mutual friends too. Like, we can go with the Landmans or whoever. But definitely come visit Montana whenever you're available. But and then so you went from being out in the nature for 4 weeks on end to going to help run the Romney campaign, going all over the country, going to probably every major city in every single state. How did you, and obviously you're very adaptable, but how were you able to adapt from being in the woods for 4 weeks, probably a limited Wi-Fi and connection, to just suddenly having to be connected to 100 different people and going to 100 different places?
Yeah. I guess I just, you had to jump right into it. I think one of the funny things was that I got asked, can you drive a van? Like, do you know how to drive? And I didn't really know how to drive because in London you didn't really need a car. But at camp, I drove a lot, and I would drive, kids around, and so I actually had the experience needed to drive around, politicians from all over, until I got bumped out of that part of the job, thankfully, by security and then the Secret Service. But I was doing that for a while, and I was pretty good at it. So that worked out. Who knew that was going to be a skill? And you do actually remind me of a funny thing because at that time, I think I had an iPhone, but the campaign was using Blackberries. And so I had I think I might have had three phones. I had two Blackberries and an iPhone for the first part of the campaign. And I think by the end of the campaign, we had transitioned to iPhones. And so there was this kind of live transition of technology, during that time. I can kind of go into this in more detail, but that was a big part of my journey into tech was, that was the first, maybe the second, campaign 2008 with Obama, and obviously that was another Obama campaign, and technology was a huge part of both the day to day of the campaign, but also the outcome of the campaign, and kind of the innovation that was happening in politics. I think drove a lot of innovation generally because it was shown to be so effective if you use it correctly at large scale, which maybe beyond the big tech company successes hadn't been seen kind of culturally yet, right? And so I think the cultural impact of technology and politics at that time, was huge, and brought me back into the tech world, immediately after that kind of campaign, on the ground campaign experience that, again, I feel very lucky. It was the most interesting and rewarding and crazy first job I can think of, meeting and being around these incredible leaders and people of all kinds, right? Both the local organizers and people who were, the community leaders, but also the top donors in New York that we would go see. And of course, the people, on the campaign itself. I learned a lot from, being in the rooms, and, I had no right to be in the rooms that I was in some of those ways, but I, learned a ton, in that year, and set me up well for the next things.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because I remember reading an article like a long time ago that Obama was like the first president in history to have access to smartphones and access to consistent Wi-Fi and internet connection. And he was using a BlackBerry, which is kind of funny because BlackBerry I don't believe exists really anymore. Going back to how seeing this technological shift happen, working for the Romney campaign around 2011, and kind of having it be the catalyst into your technology career. What were kind of like the specifics that helped you transition to technology from being in political science?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of, once that experience ended, I kind of knew I didn't want to be, in politics in general, but American politics, was quite becoming even more fractured, and I grew up in the UK, as you know, and it wasn't, permanently going to make that my life, kind of to change kind of political, direction in one way or another. So I started looking for new things, and kind of gravitated back towards technology. And at that point, there was more of that connection between the political world and the tech world. So, so yeah, really started looking. I lived in DC, for 6 months to a year, kind of did some things there, and pretty quickly realized I was probably going to end up back in California. Assumed San Francisco. A lot of my friends still lived in San Francisco, worked at tech companies. I was kind of looking at that journey. And then I had also met a lot of these people and donors who were very well connected in Silicon Valley, and I actually was lucky enough to know someone who basically got me a meeting at A16Z, Andreessen Horowitz. And so I flew out from DC, rolled up into the heart, of Silicon Valley and the beautiful Sand Hill Road offices, and kind of walked into a meeting with a senior partner there. I had done my research. I'd looked at all the portfolio companies, and I had a little, spiel about, each one, and had done my research. And then this was like, a big moment. He was like, what do you want to do at these companies? Sales, marketing, whatever, PR. And I was basically waffled that answer. And he just looks at me and he goes, "You're going to be in sales. Like, you are a salesperson. You are going to be in sales." And I was like, okay. And it was pretty harsh. And I felt like I screwed up the meeting. I walked out and literally thought it went terribly. Of course, young person, didn't know what was going on. And then I got an email afterwards to the CEO of SurveyMonkey, the CEO of, three other companies, including NationBuilder, which was Jim Gilliam, an amazing entrepreneur and leader. And that company, NationBuilder, happened to be in the political space. It was one of the early companies that came out of that kind of political technology transition of like, how do you use technology and CRM and, organizing people online to change outcomes and build communities and build movements. And NationBuilder was it's a great company. It's a nonpartisan, movement building technology. And the minute I met Jim and Leah. Leah's now the CEO, and Jim sadly passed away kind of during my time there. They're amazing leaders. I immediately, had an amazing conversation with them, talked about camp and polar bears and, life. And they were looking for people with some political experience, but really, people who wanted to make a big impact in the world of tech and kind of be part of this global mission that they had. So that conversation was a no-brainer. The funny thing was that they were building the company in LA. It was one of Jim's many big kind of crazy ideas as a entrepreneur and CEO, is that building not in San Francisco and being part of a community of actually downtown LA was the right thing to do for a company trying to build community, and not just kind of be in the tech community, but build our own community and bring a whole bunch of people into a community and kind of revitalize an area and kind of do it locally and globally. So when I first heard LA, I said, this is a great company, but I'm not moving to LA. I have no interest. And, a few months later, I was on a plane to LA, moving there sight unseen. And ended up at NationBuilder for almost 10 years. So that was a pretty big jump in my life.
Wow. And so I see you started in LA and then you're at NationBuilder for it looks like about 2 or 3 years, and then you went back to London. So how did that all come to be?
Yeah.
And I do like the point that you brought up too, that, instead of building in Silicon Valley, growing in LA, because I think there's just tons of different industries in LA. So it was like just super diverse area. But yeah, how did that come to be where you went from LA to London, NationBuilder?
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess I got per the Andreessen Horowitz meeting, I thought I was, I guess I thought I was going to be in sales. And when you first join a young and growing startup, you are doing everything. So I was doing sales, marketing, customer success. We were cold calling at midnight. We were scrapping. It was a whole bunch of young people in a room, and we were calling everybody who started a website that had anything to do with politics or nonprofits or advocacy, and it was super fun and exciting, and love those early days. And then over the next few years, I've started to specialize more in kind of the sales side directly, as we kind of split from being a product led. One of the big disruptions we had at the time was, selling software that normally costs a lot of money, kind of that was siloed in different parties built up for different, campaigns, to everybody for $29 a month. And so it was a big kind of revolution in getting that kind of organizing technology into the hands of small nonprofits and city council campaigns. It just didn't exist. And Jim just built it into the world, coded everything by hand, early, started in, 2010, so it was early days in that kind of SaaS, niche SaaS zone. And then we had success kind of in building that brand and building, that kind of launch. And then we started going kind of enterprise. And I was, one of the early people on the enterprise team, working with larger, state parties, national political parties, companies, and, big nonprofits to use the technology and to kind of advance their, organizing capabilities. So did that in LA, was in DC a lot. So I was kind of back in DC leading, from afar, leading the DC team and working with a lot of associations and industry groups in DC. And that was always a good time to, to come back and see some old friends who'd stuck around in politics and, which also, by the way, at that time was when I met my now co-founder, which was, because he was also in the political adjacent, agency and technology world in DC. So that at that time, I was building a kind of co-working, peer relationship with Alex, who's now the CEO and co-founder of Topline, and but yeah, we just kind of crossed paths at that time, and then London came out from continued success at NationBuilder for the company and a big international kind of expansion. So really, there's a global mission there, and they had started to build an amazing team. There was an amazing leader building the team in London, and there was an opportunity to get back and help build the team there and grow the business there. And it was something that I'd always wanted to do. I think when I had joined a tech company at that stage of my career, I had said I'd like to join the international expansion team because of my background. And I think it was kind of a thing at that time. I think, remember like everyone was leading Uber's expansion team in Latin America or, Lyft or, all the companies were kind of expanding globally. And so that was something I always thought about, and it worked out. And what was really cool about it, well, a few things, is that I got to live in London as a adult for the first time, because I left when I was 17, 18. So I'd never actually worked and lived there. And it was an entirely different experience, being a professional in London, and growing a team in London. And then very luckily, we were going all over Europe. So I was spending time in taking the Eurostar to Brussels and Paris and working with political parties in Romania. And I was in charge of Europe, Middle East, and Africa, so it was really a wide swath of opportunity and totally different perspective of the type of people we got to work with.
That sounds like, honestly, like you've had like the dream career for most people, like being able to travel, live in so many different cool places, from London to the Bay Area to DC. I consider LA a pretty cool place. But of all the places that you've lived in, now you're living in North Carolina. But of
South
all the
Carolina,
places,
Charleston.
or
Yeah,
excuse me, Charleston,
yeah.
excuse me, South Carolina. So out of all these different places you've lived all over the world, what is your favorite place and why?
So I guess it's not a particularly unique answer, but I kind of my next stage of the journey after London was I got an itch to move to New York. So I'd been to all of these other places, and New York was not somewhere I ever thought I was going to live. But after living in London again and having experienced the US kind of so deeply and not having experienced New York, I kind of had this just honestly epiphany that I woke up one day in London. We'd had the pandemic, so that was, not great for anyone, but it wasn't, a lot of people I think needed change, including myself at that time, to kind of do something a little different than, at that point was London was pretty locked down. And I think once we kind of came out of that, terrible collective experience, I had this desire for change again and hadn't done New York and moved there with NationBuilder to try to help build kind of these helping companies kind of advocate for the things that they believed in. And there was a lot of kind of fake brand work happening around that. And, we were helping companies make it a bit more real and community focused with like real kind of organizing principles of how you actually make a change in a community as a business. And got to move to New York with that kind of job function in mind, and absolutely fell in love with New York. I feel like the I was kind of craving, having lived in Europe again, kind of that more like dynamic, ambitious work life, and people really caring about what they did and taking really big swings. I think in London there's a lot of amazing smart people, a lot of like entrepreneurship, but you're not taking a really big swing often in London and Europe. And I kind of wanted to take a big swing and make a really big difference. And New York just had everything I wanted. It was amazing. Everyone who lives in New York is there for a reason. And so you have this amazing kind of dynamic group of people who are trying to meet socially, but meet professionally, at the same time. And you bump into people that you would never bump into in any other city at a regularity that is, just like nothing I'd ever seen before. I loved and still love New York. So I think it's a pretty special place, and it gets a bad rap. And, when you're in it and you're in it for the right reason, it can bring a lot of joy. So that's my answer there.
That's always been a dream of mine to live in Manhattan, New York. It seems like one of the most amazing cities in the world where you can just get out of your apartment and there's hundreds of opportunities just everywhere, amazing restaurants, amazing bars. Going back to your career and going back to Topline, you're the co-founder of Topline. Why did you go from a stable job, with, a consistent salary to being an entrepreneur and being a co-founder of a startup?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it might have been, New York rubbed off on me a little bit in the sense of those, big inspiring swings that people are taking. I had also, while I was in London, joined this LSE program, um, to keep things moving during the pandemic and, keep learning because it was challenging in that time. But it was an amazing program in social business and entrepreneurship. So kind of exactly what I was then doing, which was trying to help, businesses move forward and kind of do entrepreneurship at companies to try to innovate. I remember at that time, the head of that program said at the beginning of it, everyone here will quit their job after this program. And of course, you're like, no, we won't. I love my job. I've been there a long time. I love the people and I love the mission. And I did. And I still do at NationBuilder. It's an amazing company. And it was a very hard place to leave for those reasons, but also because it was stable and I was succeeding and helping there. I just think so many different levels of my career, I kind of been exposed to entrepreneurship and those big swings and really wanting to make a difference and make something of my own. And so I had started thinking about it, and started, talking to a lot of people. And I was, trying to figure out what I wanted to do next and kind of my big next phase of my career. It just kind of came to be that Alex, the CEO, my co-founder of Topline, reached out to me about a different kind of VP of sales type opportunity at one of his portfolio companies. He was working on a venture studio at the time and had a good conversation about that, had a meeting. And then I was like, what are you up to? You've had an amazing career. I had been tracking his career a little bit. He had sold a couple companies and been an entrepreneur kind of in the space. So I always kind of looked up to him in that way. I was like, you're doing the space well, but you're also building businesses and doing entrepreneurship within the space. And I asked him, what are you up to? And he pulls out the top line deck and, asked me for my thoughts about it. And he ran through it. And it was just a crazy kind of aha moment at that time where the model that he had presented and what we were doing at Topline was almost exactly what I had done for my like fake business school project at LSE. And, so we just immediately started talking about, how I could help. And he was looking for someone to really, run go to market and bring that kind of SaaS sales experience. And so one thing led to another there, but it was just so obvious, when we met that this was the right thing for me to do. And most importantly, it was a massive and is a massive swing at changing kind of a big problem, solving a big problem that we had both seen. I think that is uniquely bad in the political adjacent space, but it's something that we both agree is a problem everywhere, which is that the best professionals don't win necessarily because of the way the systems are set up. So obviously you might think of like candidates, the best candidates not winning, but really it's what drives that is the best consultants, aren't being chosen. And the people running these organizations, the people advising on policy, on organization, on people and hiring, like those consultants are just the people who other people know. And it's this very insular world where if you're bad at your job, you don't necessarily get, not chosen for the next big thing and not paid millions of dollars for the next thing. And as I kind of worked my way through my career, I saw that over and over again, that there's basically in the kind of consulting and professional services space, there's almost no meritocracy. It's all insular industry networks, and it's about who you know and how much you promote yourself and how much you can afford to promote yourself. That is how you kind of win as a business in that space. And Alex articulated that vision in a way that I had never seen before, and with a business model that I was fascinated in, which is basically SaaS plus a kind of frictionless marketplace as well. And I'd always kind of not liked the marketplace kind of extraction model, and I'd liked the SaaS model, and he kind of brought them together. And that's kind of what we're doing now, which is trying to solve that very large problem of like meritocratic hiring and business growth, with a whole bunch of tools and models at Topline. So that's how that all happened.
Wow. I love that. And I definitely think you have an amazing product, and I think it's going to be, I think you took the right heavy swing. Going back to that, why do you, just you in particular, why do you want to swing or just take those bigger risks? Like what's inside of you that wants to take those big risks?
I think, I mean, I don't know kind of what comes first, right? Like, but it's kind of a value of mine. I think it probably comes from the mentors that I've had and, the exposure to entrepreneurship that I've had in that, having a big mission and seeing those big companies, get started from, fairly close to my personal experience kind of has, I've always thought that if you're going to, do it, you should go big and you can. It would almost seem like a disservice to kind of myself, but more importantly, the mission. If you just try to kind of keep it really contained and you don't really believe that it can be impactful at a large scale, and for me, with my background, a global scale. Like I don't really want to start a company that can't be global, let alone just local. And for many people, I think I was listening to one of the other podcasts and kind of being like, don't do it. It's hard, and I'm feeling that every day. It's a tough journey, and I think the kind of bigger you swing and the kind of wider you are, it's challenging. But yeah, to me, I had to based on
It's
my
more
story, I
rewarding.
guess. Yeah, yeah,
Right. No, 100%. And just for our listeners to understand exactly what top line is, what would you say, like just the quick 20-second elevator pitch?
yeah. So I think we're building the tool set and kind of growth ecosystem for what, we're calling the career of the future. So not future of work, but actually how people are building their careers now is instead of, 30 years ago, two or three jobs, maybe total in your career, right? Now, maybe people are changing jobs every 2 or 3 years on average, but some people even now, and I think our big bet is that a lot of people in the future will have two or three jobs or kind of sources of income at once, right? And so there's a lot of words in this, fractional zone, but it's really it can be anything. And we're still using some extremely outdated kind of tool sets and mechanisms that aren't suited for that world. So we're using resumes still, really long hiring processes and, even AI to AI interviews. Like the things that are kind of being built are not optimized for this like meritocratic world. They're kind of taking these small problems and trying to solve them with AI. And what we're building is essentially a growth ecosystem to streamline how top professionals kind of find, evaluate, and hire each other in that new world. And we're removing friction, high costs. Like a lot of these professionals don't need marketing agencies and really expensive software solutions. Like that whole world is being disaggregated, and we're removing the kind of friction and digital clutter from these systems so people can just connect directly and, have valuable tools at their disposal but at X lower costs than traditionally tech companies were able to build them. So we're able to build almost like a membership model where you can have one subscription and have access to all the tools that you might need to grow, a professional services business. So we focus on working with anyone who has clients. If you have customers, you're a tech company or you're a retail e-commerce, like the current ways of marketing, Facebook, Google, it works pretty well. But if you're a cybersecurity consultant growing a business or a fractional CTO, like that doesn't work. And you still need visibility and you need to grow your presence in a different way. And you don't want to spend all your time wasting on LinkedIn. So Topline is a way to connect directly and then have the tools to grow your business as well.
I love that. And just another thing within Topline, is there a way to kind of quantify the technical value that you'd get from interacting with this person? Like, if that makes sense, because I feel like in the tech world, or like just if you're a CTO, if you're, a developer or an engineer, it's really hard to distinguish or tell how talented that person is. Does Topline kind of have that function to display how much value this person can bring to your company?
Yeah. So one of the things we're doing is in enabling that direct connection model and avoiding that five-step process of paying Google or Facebook to advertise and then maybe book a meeting and then maybe not be qualified is, everyone has in theory an hourly rate that they would be willing to take a meeting for, right? Whether you're looking or looking, to hire. And if we can enable a direct connection where that value exchange, you're actually, I would pay you to $50 to meet right now because this is valuable. I probably pay you a couple $100 to do this right now. But, a lot of people would be going out and advertising to find podcast guests and, spending a whole amount of time to do it. We just want that value to exchange between the person, and that can happen at all levels of profession. And so basically that rate, that kind of potential is determined, the more you put into the profile, the more you kind of build your presence and kind of have your information on the system, the better that can be, and the more accurate it will be. And one of the ways we're getting there, and really we just launched this year, is working with industry associations, business networking groups. Like, we don't need to go and sell this to people who are, just trying to build, go about their business. There's a lot of people already part of these communities that can essentially give this value away and change the way people connect, change this kind of value of time and attention. So I know we've talked about it, but I'm working with chambers of commerce all over the country that their job is to grow those businesses, but more importantly, those professionals in those local communities. So, like Facebook took over universities, we want to kind of work with other groups that are already doing the great work in their communities and just give them this tool set to add value to their membership, to add value to what they're already doing in the space. And they can also help us say, these are the industry benchmarks. This is the nuance of this industry or this location. And, it's a really exciting kind of way to get there, and change that.
That's amazing, Chris. I think there's a lot of value add within Topline, and I think there's going to be a lot of success coming with it. I love what you're building. Are there any last, any kind of final thoughts or words of advice or wisdom that you'd like to share to our listeners?
I guess mine would be find amazing co-founders. I know that's not for everyone, but I think building something where you're aligned personally and really feel like you have a team, that could be mentors but I think I can't imagine doing this journey alone. And I'm lucky to have two co-founders who not only are they amazing marketers and AI technical experts, but they just want to talk to customers too. And they want to, be out there with me kind of on the go-to-market side, which I'm very lucky. But I think building with people that you love and respect and are inspired by, I think is a gift and something everyone should strive for, even though, it's easier said than done. And I feel very lucky. And I think be ready for the ups and downs. Like, it sounds like it's been nice to reflect on my kind of career and journey, but as fun and, as it sounds, like there have been some extreme ups and downs in that journey in my whole career where I thought I had no idea what I was doing and making the wrong moves and changing industries. And then even now, I think every founder gets this. The ups and downs are crazy. They're day to day. And, especially if you're doing something new that's totally different, it's going to feel like it's not going to work, sometimes, or maybe more often than not. And you just got to kind of keep pushing through it and finding community and, being out there, which is obviously how, I found you guys. And it's definitely, becoming a strong part of kind of my makeup of communities, that keeps me going and, gives me support in the journey. So I really appreciate, everything you guys are doing and how you supported me and, how we built a relationship across the internet, across the world. And I hope to take you up on the fly fishing in Montana.
100%, Chris. We will, hopefully maybe this summer, we will get connected in Montana and fly fish. Fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed your time today, Chris. I will put all your information in the show notes, so all our listeners have access to Topline, your information, like your LinkedIn. They want to get connected with you. Really appreciate your time today, Chris, and have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thanks so much. You too. Bye.